in practice since 1981. So that makes me in practice almost 40 years. So I've seen a lot of things change over the years. During this time, I've had a model of practice that is what I would call holistic. We used to call holistic, now call it whole person health. The basic strategies that I'm going to review with you today have evolved very slowly over this period of time. They started with the basic nutritional things that we'll review later. And the things that I'm going to talk about at the beginning are actually the things that I've been learning the most recently, and which I find it's all really fascinating to me. I find how things fit together and form the big picture to be personally fun to do, especially when it helps people be healthy. Then it's really enjoyable. And I consider the things that we're going to talk about here tonight to be kind of the keys to having the best health. There's a lot of other things that we won't be able to cover. So this is kind of an overview. One way I was thinking about it tonight was I was thinking about those sort of Google Maps projects where you start way up in the air and you're very far away, and you hone in closer and you see the state, and you move in closer and you see the city, and then you move into the section of the town, and then you move into the house that you want to look at. And so we're kind of going to be moving all the way from looking at the earth from way far away and moving right down to look at one of the houses, so to speak. So this isn't everything. The big view, the big picture is, there's lots of fascinating stuff that's important to consider. So we're going to be just focusing on part of that big picture tonight that is just basically related to nutrition. So I wanted to kind of give that idea as a starting point, and then kind of tell a story. And I saw a patient today that I've actually been seeing for more than 30 years, so I know this person very well, and this person's medical issues I know very well also. And she has had a major problem with chronic fatigue for a long time. And so while she's made a lot of progress, she's still dealing with this. And a lot of the things that we're going to talk about tonight were actually part of the conversation that we had today, because what I was explaining to her, I was explaining some of her thyroid hormone results, which showed that she was suffering from a chronic stress problem. And she said to me, but I don't feel stress. And so I explained to her that the intimate connection between our bowel and our brain, and when that intimate connection is disturbed, it turns on the chronic stress response. So the biochemical process that we call chronic stress, and you can measure the hormonal changes in the body, that gets turned on just by goofing up the connection between how your bowel talks to your brain. And so the things that we're going to talk about are part of the solution to that disruption that I believe is epidemic in our country. And it's been a sort of a creeping change. So it's one of those things like where the frog gets boiled alive. You start with cold water and you slowly heat it up, and the temperature change is so slow it doesn't notice that it's getting too hot, and then it never does jump out of the water. And that's what's been happening to people in our society, is that the environmental things that have been going on internally have been changing so subtly that we don't know to jump out of the stew before it's too late. But you just have to look at the evidence of things like the exploding incidence of autism in children, the exploding incidence of Alzheimer's dementia in older people, and the exploding incidence of obesity. And you got to step back and think, what in the world is happening that's causing all this stuff to happen so fast? And I do believe that it's in very significant, to a significant degree, related to the things that we're going to talk about. So I mentioned that the connection between the bowel and the brain and how that turns on the chronic stress response. So I'm going to explain that a little bit first and then get into the details of the components of that. So people have been aware that our gut kind of has a auxiliary brain, so to speak. It seems to be autonomous in some ways. That's been knowledge that we've been aware for decades. But what we have not been aware of is how the bowel needs to be intact in terms of the bacteria inside of the bowel for the communication to go back up the vagus nerve to the brain. So the brain communicates to all of the organs in our body via a nerve called the vagus nerve. This is the nerve that is connected with what we would call rest and digest. So this is kind of like the part of our autonomic nervous system, meaning the autonomic being sort of below the conscious level. This is the part of the nervous system that is supposed to balance us out against what you've heard as the fight or flight mechanism, and that's the sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is governed by the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve the brain talks to the gut via the vagus nerve, but the gut is supposed to talk back to the brain and tell the brain moment by moment what's going on down there and what you need to be eating and what you need to be doing to digest better and how blood needs to be directed back to the bowel. All that communication is going back and forth. And once you disrupt the bacteria that live in the bowel, you disrupt that communication network. Now, it's not like an off and on switch, but it is all relative. So if you disrupt it a lot, then the signal back to the brain is disrupted a lot. And for a lot of us, I think it's disrupted a lot. So when I was talking to this patient, I was explaining to her the role of the first thing we're going to talk about, which is the role of the toxins that are in our environment that damage the bacteria that live in the gut. And when you damage these bacteria, and in many cases kill them, you kill off whole species of bacteria because certain species are susceptible to certain bad stimuli. And when you do that, you change. It's not like there's fewer bacteria there, it's just different bacteria there. So there's trillions of bacteria in our gut, but the ratio of different species changes, and that's not good. But what also happens is that the communication network between the bacteria is disrupted. Now, normally, these bacteria in our gut communicate with each other at lightning speed. And when that's disrupted, then that signal, that cohesive signal from all of that colony of what we call the biome, that cohesive signal becomes a scattered signal that's sent back up to the brain. And that is part of why then there's a scattered signal that is sent back down, and we don't get balance of this rest and digest signal that's supposed to be happening to us. So the chemicals that disrupt these bacteria are mainly the pesticides and herbicides that are used on our crops, and they have very powerful effects to disrupt and to kill these bacteria. Many of these chemicals are actually antibiotics to start with, and some of them are very, very toxic. Now, some of these chemicals are also very toxic to the small bowel, and so when the small bowel, when the bowel is damaged, what happens is that the connection between the cells is damaged, and when that happens, the ability of the bowel to keep the good stuff coming through and the bad stuff in the bowel is lost, and so stuff that isn't supposed to get into our body starts to leak in. So I was talking to my wife about how we're having literally an epidemic of aluminum toxicity that we don't even know about because it's not measured for in the United States. But nanoparticles of aluminum are are very common in the environment now, and they easily leak through uh, this damaged system where the bowel is no longer working well. The cells that hook together, they're not keeping stuff in the bowel that's supposed to stay in and letting the right nutrients into the body. And there are some chemicals that help that aluminum then get transported to the brain. This is undoubtedly part of how Alzheimer's, dementia, and other neurological conditions are at least one of the contributing factors, most likely. And all we need to do is go back and say, well, how do we get the bowel fixed to withstand this kind of damage? And that's kind of the second thing I want to mention. And one of the things that I talked with Jim about early on, which is that we have heard about probiotics for years. Some people do take probiotic supplements, and that's good. But what we have underestimated is the power of probiotics that are living in foods that we can eat. And these foods have dozens of more different kind of species. And it's been my experience that by consuming probiotic-based foods, you have a lot better response to restoring the gut. So when somebody comes in with symptoms that I believe are related to a damaged GI system from the chemicals I just alluded to, getting them on this broad spectrum probiotic strategy, which means eating and drinking foods that are fermented and still have active cultures in them, is the thing that I try to do as quickly as possible. And that's one of the things that Jim and I had talked about, and he started to introduce those things into his lifestyle. Now, the way that I discovered that these things worked better than probiotic capsules is because Lyme disease is so common where I live, and we have to treat people sometimes for many months with an antibiotic. Well, antibiotics do the same bad thing to the GI tract that I just talked about that these chemicals do. And so how do you fight back? How do you help that person fight back so that they can tolerate the treatment? Because if they get too sick from the antibiotic, they have to stop it, and then Lyme disease wins. So it's critical that they have a strategy that they're kind of pushing back on a daily basis so that they can tolerate antibiotic therapy. And it's my opinion that we have so many toxins in our environment that all of us need to push back on a daily basis with good probiotic strategies. Now, using probiotic supplements is definitely a simple way to start, and it's way, way better than doing nothing. But I think using the broader approach is a better approach, and they actually are complementary approaches, so you could do both. It's not an either-or sort of thing, but I do think you miss a lot if you don't use the food-based strategies. So the other thing I was talking to this patient about today, the third focal point of her issue, which is chronic fatigue, and I think that lots of people deal with some degree of fatigue. Probably everybody sitting in the room over there has a little less energy than they used to when they were a lot younger. Now, maybe somebody there is just bouncing with energy, but most people have a little bit less than they used to, and most people have a lot less than they used to. And so I was explaining to this patient that the reason that this happens is because of these little structures that are called mitochondria. So mitochondria are the powerhouses. They're the energy producers that are in our cells. And our cells have between 200 and 4,000 mitochondria, depending on the kind of cell that it is. And one of the reasons that people start to feel more tired and they start to experience what we call aging is because they have a drop-off of mitochondrial function. So I was explaining to this patient that her mitochondria stopped working well years ago. And so it's like a power plant that is only working at half efficiency. And I explained to her that one of the things that these mitochondria are supposed to do is to recognize that at some point they're so inefficient they should now recycle themselves. And that ability to do that depends on having the right nutrients present. If you don't have the right nutrients present, in the cell at that moment, that mitochondria will not recycle itself. It will just self-destruct. And so instead of having 1,000 mitochondria, she might be down to 700 mitochondria per cell, and or even less. And all of those mitochondria operating at half efficiency. Well, that's a really critical point. If you want to recover your energy, you have to focus on, well, how am I going to get nutrients to the mitochondria? Well, obviously, that's dependent on what we're eating. But in my opinion, it's really critical to use nutritional supplements because it is unlikely that even the most pristine diet is going to deliver all the key nutrients that signal to those little mitochondria, it's time to repair yourself, it's time to recycle yourself, and it's time to upregulate to a higher level of efficiency. So we call that cell signaling. There are nutrients that actually signal the mitochondria to do these things. And if you're missing these nutrients, you're going to miss that signal, and you're going to experience gradual decline in this process. Well, I think that this is a big part of the gut repairing itself, because we're already talking about small bowel that's been damaged, and the cells have to fix themselves. And they're having the same issue with this mitochondria stuff that everything else in the body is if they don't have the right key nutrients. So that's one of the reasons that I've become even more a believer in nutritional supplementation than I was 20 years ago, as I understand this whole thing about mitochondrial health and the intimate connection it has between aging and energy levels as we get older and onset of disease that inevitably happens if we can't support the energy that the cell needs. The cell just will stop functioning normally. And when you have whole bunches of cells within an organ that stop functioning normally, then the organ stops functioning normally. So the other thing that I was reminded of with nutritional supplements was I was studying some old material after talking to Jim yesterday, and I just went back and looked at the evidence that there are some key nutrients that are antioxidants that help to prevent the damage that these toxins that I was talking about have on the cells in the first place. And that was really the original reason I started using nutritional supplementation. And I was reminded that that's really a critical thing that these supplements can do also, which is to mitigate the damage of these toxins that are out there anyway. And they are powerful in doing that. And the analogy that we've used in the past, and I think it's a very apt analogy, is that just normal cell chemistry is kind of like a fire burning in a fireplace. And when you've ever watched a fire burning in a fireplace, there's always sparks coming out. And if you've ever been in a place where there's a rug in front of a fireplace without any kind of a screen in front of it, you know that rug has lots of little burn holes in it. And that's what happens to our cells if we don't have this network of antioxidant defense that helps to stop these free radicals that are formed by the chemistry of the body, and especially by the toxins that affect us. Well, it turns out that these antioxidants that we take are important, but they are like 1/100th of the power of the body's own antioxidant systems that are generated within the cell. But again, you need to have the cell signaling for the body to make those very powerful antioxidants. Now that's why, because the body makes these very powerful antioxidants, that's why kids that are in their teens and in their 20s can eat garbage and still get by really well, even though they're just eating garbage, because their body's still making plenty of these very powerful antioxidants, even though they're not eating any. Their diet might be totally devoid of antioxidants, but they're making them plenty, except that system dies out real fast in about age 40 and above if you don't have the right nutrients to keep on signaling the cell to make these super powerful antioxidants. And then the fourth thing that I was talking to this patient about was the key of eating in a way that doesn't spike inflammation in the body, because it is inflammation that causes It's microinflammation that causes almost all the chronic diseases we're dealing with, and or aggravates them. And so there are two critical things that I talk about to almost every patient that wants to use lifestyle to get better. I always have this conversation, and usually I have it every time I see the patient, just to see how they're doing with this particular strategy, because I consider it foundational. And that is to eat in a way that doesn't make more inflammatory molecules. And the most important way to do that is to eat in a way that doesn't cause inflammation, caused by insulin. So everybody's heard of insulin. Most people think of it as a hormone that just helps to store sugar, and it does. But when we eat in a way that the blood sugar rises rapidly from that meal, we force the body to pump out way too much insulin. And if we do that over and over again, that starts to produce a lot more inflammation than the body was ever designed for from this insulin alone. And that will aggravate any disease. And if I have patients who have any kind of a chronic inflammatory condition, they feel better when they start eating in a way that doesn't spike the insulin. So we call that eating in a low glycemic way. That means we're talking about carbs that don't raise the blood sugar quickly. So that's basically vegetables and fruits as the source of our carbohydrates. And the second part of eating in a non-inflammatory way is to avoid bad fats. And there's basically two kinds of bad fats that I really encourage people to avoid. And the first are the trans fats, which are the artificial fats that people have heard about for years. And I think a lot of people have been lulled into thinking that these have been eliminated from our diets, and they haven't been. What's happened is that the food industry has decreased the amount that is in our food to the level that they don't have to report it on the label. So if it says 0 trans fats, that doesn't mean that it's 0 trans fats. It just means it's below a certain level. So you have to actually read the fats that are on the label to see if there's trans fats in there. And if it's a packaged food, a big percentage of those will have trans fats in them, even though they're not on the label as far as what percent of fat. And then the second bad fat are the vegetable oils, not because vegetable oils are inherently bad, but because of the way they've been processed. So they're generally, the vegetable oils that you can get in stores are processed, they're extracted by a high heat method, or they use hexane to clarify the oils. And this produces a broken fat, essentially, which then is pro-inflammatory instead of anti-inflammatory. So eliminating these two things, high glycemic foods, or at least decreasing them as much as possible, and trying to avoid the inflammatory fats, decreases the inflammation. So that kind of is the last part of the strategy of trying to keep the gut as healthy as possible, and to help to restore the gut if you're dealing with disease. So it doesn't matter whether a person is dealing with arthritis, or they've got diabetes, or they're overweight, they got high blood pressure, they got heart disease, they've got cancer. I give that bit of advice would be the same for everybody that wanted to use lifestyle to their best advantage to maintain or recover their health. Then we would move on into exercise, and we would move on into other strategies for stress reduction. So these other areas are all critically important too, but these things that I just talked about, I consider the most important things that I've discovered over the years as I've kind of paid attention to what makes people well, what makes people sick, how do people recover their health, and who has the best chance, what strategy has the best chance of working. And so as time has gone by, it's kind of been distilled down into these 4 major areas. So that's the overview, and I'm happy to entertain any questions if you have any.
Do we have anything off the bat you would like to ask? Hey, Doc, can I, and can I ask the audience too? I want to take a little risk at this point and bounce some of my observations off and just see how it resonates with people, just for us learning. Because here, is that okay with you, Doc?
Sure.
Okay. The first time I heard about gut health was not Dr. Lang. Okay, and could you tell he's passionate? And can you tell he's done a lot with this information? He's helped a lot of people. The person that I heard presented the first time was Dr. Labrat. And he is the chief physician or whatever at this. It's a very well-respected holistic healing facility, functional medicine facility. His passion was equal to what Doc's was. I mean, it's like, it starts with the gut, it starts with the gut, it starts with the gut, you know? And I'm sitting there going, hey, we market vitamins. That's kind of where I'm coming from, okay? And it wasn't until I had a chance to hear this multiple times that I think, and I want your help. I want to see how what I say resonates from you guys, and then I also want to make sure from Doc I'm not misleading or misstating, because I'm trying to understand this in a way that I can easily explain it to people, because it's so simple we're missing it. All right, and I want to come up with a way to do that. So I would like to try for a couple minutes, stop me if it gets corny or doesn't work or whatever. But my first question is, who here is aware that almost all the food grown in the U.S. is grown with the use of herbicides, pesticides, and commercial fertilizers? So can we say that is a reality? Okay. And I think if you ask that question from all of your adult friends and even children, they would say farmers put stuff on the food to make it grow better or whatever. And so the purpose or the intent there from the people that do this is good. They say it helps hold down the cost of farming, hold down the cost of goods. It increases yield. All these things are great. I mean, they not only sound great, the intent is good. The problem is there are unintended consequences from that very few people are aware of. I was not aware of it, even after I heard about gut health. All right. And so here comes the thing about gut health, is now that I am aware of it, and I am aware of this concept that I don't fully understand yet, that the gut is a brain, but it is a brain that not only minorly controls our health, it massively influences our health. And so now I get into, I think we all have one thing in common, no matter how old you are, no matter how young you are, no matter what you think about the way we farm, or what you think about the political environment, or what your religion is, I don't care. I think we all have something in common. Pretty much like being happy, whatever that means for us, right? And I think there's a couple ingredients to being happy. One is feeling good. And right now, Bart is in insurance. He does insurance for big companies, and it's a big problem right now. They're trying to figure out how to hold down costs. But the most significant chunk of money being spent in our healthcare system and in insurance is in chronic degenerative disease. If I took my notes right, I heard him say that poor gut health accelerates aging, causes fatigue, causes inflammation, causes chronic stress, okay, and it is undoubtedly, if not arguably, the leading contributor to these degenerative diseases that are the leading cause of premature death in our country. And dying, I mean, it depends on your faith background, isn't a big problem. Okay, it's living with a problem for a long period of time and being a burden financially. The last number I'm aware of, and I asked Mark to try to check, is 85% of healthcare dollars are being spent on chronic degenerative disease. Which, now that I understand a little bit about gut health, it brings us to what do we do about it? Because you can't avoid it. We can't breathe air from somewhere else. We can't, there's nothing perfect, okay, out there, but we can improve. And he has 4 steps. The 4 simple steps were wrapped in there. I'm just going to break them down. Real simple. 1 is supplement. He gave strong reasons for supplementing. Now, my way of saying that is life is a gift, it's a blessing. The body is a miracle. It's made up of trillions of little tiny miracles. Each one needs to be healthy to contribute to your sense of well-being. If those little miracles aren't getting what they're needing, it's the beginning of degenerative disease. It's the beginning of the downward spiral. And so if we're suggesting that our food, which is being grown in a way that maybe isn't perfect, and that's also the same food, by the way, that's being fed to the animals that we're consuming, and fed to the animals, which are us, that's affecting these cells. So supplementing allows these little miracles to have a fighting chance. It's as simple as I can say it. You know, if they're in there fighting without the raw materials, they're fighting a losing battle. We talked about this yesterday, which I was excited to hear him say, and the way he rolled it in today is younger people will fight that battle better. But who wants to deplete their body? I mean, who wants to fight that battle in the first place? Why not minimize the effects of aging? Why not minimize some of these things if we know what to do? Supplementation, and I've always said of the 4 legs, this is one thing I haven't shifted on. It'd be interesting what he says. For most people, it is the simplest, cheapest, most doable alternative. Because all you got to do is, we can talk about the differences in supplementation out there, but make sure you're getting the right one from the right source, buy it, and do it. The rest require a little bit of discipline, a little bit of lifestyle change. They're not hard. They're not hard. But step 1, supplement. Step 2, help build back that bacteria. Okay, start doing something that adds the beneficial bacteria into your body. I make kefir. We did it here and share it with people. There's other things. There's fermented vegetables. There's other things. There's whole blogs on fermented foods. But add that. Apple cider vinegar. Organic apple cider vinegar is another easy way, and cheap. Okay, these things are both so cheap, and we don't sell this stuff. Okay, now we do sell. Like I have a buddy who says, Jim, I'm not making kefir, and I'm not going to go fermenting vegetables. It ain't going to happen. He buys store-bought kefir now. It's not as potent. It does not have as many strains of bacteria in it as the stuff you make at home, but it's better than nothing. And I suggested to him that he buy our probiotic packet and add it to the store-bought kefir, which will expand the strains of bacteria and increase the number of bacteria that he's receiving. That was the easiest conversation I've ever had. He said, done, let's do it. Because he heard what's going on here, and he also he's a doctor, and he asked a lot of questions of the doc. So that's number 2. Feed the cells, feed the body, feed the miracle. Next, add some good bacteria into your lifestyle. Now, be real honest, those 2 things are what shifted Claire's condition, which she developed really nasty psoriasis, came out as skin issues on her legs and stuff. And it messed her ego up for a year. She would not wear her favorite clothes. She cried at night. She was upset. I drove her to the ocean. She sat in the ocean because somebody told her to sit in seawater would help. And we did all this crazy stuff. Sent her to Mexico, spent thousands and thousands of dollars because we weren't going to do the prescription drugs that you see on TV, because that would be hypocritical. We're not going to do that. So that one shift in our life, adding kefir and the bacteria and apple cider vinegar on top of our supplementation, shifted it like that in 60 days and I started noticing a difference. Next, and that is, I believe, in my mind, the next easiest thing for people to understand and do. It's doable, right? The next one might take a little bit more discipline, but I think it's very doable. And that's to start working in a direction of avoiding the foods that are causing the most toxic damage. So my big sacrifice is I gave up buns on my hamburger. Okay, give up wheat if you can, but it's a step in the right direction. We're not going to go from white belt to black belt on this journey in 2 days. It takes about 4 or 5 years to go from white belt to black belt in real martial arts. It has to win every day because I did it. And And so, you know, we have to be realistic with where we are. We don't want us to make it sound futile. The environment's screwed up. We're all screwed. You know, what we're saying is if this is our reality today, with what we know is the best prudent thing I can do if I care about managing my own health. If I want to be one of those people that are out there spending 85 cents on every dollar, I don't care. But if I care and I want to live a long, happy life, I do care. The last thing gets into another discipline issue, which is learning what the difference between high glycemic and low glycemic foods are, and committing yourself as much as possible without asking people to be over the top, whacked out zealots. If you are in a pre-diabetic condition or diabetic, you got to be a whacked out zealot. Okay, there's no option. There's just no option. But if you're an average Joe and you learn that I'm going to be 80-90% on track, and if I have a celebration day or a birthday party or something, I may deviate, but move in that direction. Those 4 things are doable. And I'm not perfect, I'm not pretending to be perfect, but I can tell you that it's made a big difference for Claire and I. And so I'm trying to come up with a way to easily explain what I've learned from multiple scientists. I've heard multiple scientists talk on this topic. I heard the people from Son of Eve, that's the talk on it. And it's taken a year of me listening to Doc to go, oh, and then in all reality, what brought it together was one day he was sitting and I'm saying, man, my wife, when we talk to anybody about this, we're fighting this deal with her legs. She's embarrassed. And I told them what all we've done. And they had all told us that she had a gluten intolerance. He said, Jim, I don't think that's what it is. I think it's gut health. And boom, I'm sold. The world needs to know about this. And I want to, with your help, honest feedback to me. How do we make this simpler to share? The products that we have are phenomenal. And yes, we've represented this company for a long time. And yes, I get a check every week because I tell people about the products. But this is really about empowering people in a way that they can make new and different choices. And if they tell people about it, I can show them how they can make money on it too. But our primary purpose here is helping people live happy, healthy lives. And so, I don't know, did that make sense? Doc, did I misspeak?
Sound good to me.
So with that said, I encourage you to ask questions, okay? I know that people, you know, like, okay, the birthing world and infertility, and make sure we ask the hard questions, seriously, because we want to cut around all this stuff out there that's confusing and go straight to the heart of it. And the straight truth of it is the body is built to be healthy. And if it's not, something's in the way. And most of the time, it's us. Okay. And so, if there's questions, concerns, I said, how many of you guys know how farming is going to be like this? If I were to ask, how many of you guys know of people that are dealing with cancer, know of people dealing with diabetes, know of people that are dealing with obesity, know of people, run up and down the 7 top killers. You're all going to go, sure, I know somebody with, I know somebody in every category. They don't know this. All right? This is a gift we're trying to give to you that you can give to others. I can't say it any other way. And so, anyway, please ask me some questions. Yep.
Well, not necessarily a question, just kind of spitting off on the body is a miracle. And it's very intelligent. And the only other advice that I would give to everyone is to listen to your body. You know, don't listen to everybody else and this diet plan and that diet plan and whatever. Listen to your body. Take note of how you feel after you eat something, you know, because we all come from different areas ethnically, if I can say it that way. You know, we all got different genes. And whether we turn on this gene or that gene has to do with what foods we eat and how we feel. Listen to your body.
Sounds good. You got any commentary on what I said or what she said, Doc?
I can't hear you, Jim.
I'm sorry. I didn't know if you had any commentary on either what I said, or were you able to hear Deborah, what she was saying about listening to your body?
Yeah, I can hear Deborah really well. Well, yeah, I think that's really wise advice. Your body does give lots of signals, and sometimes they're not immediate. Like I have a back injury from years ago, and sometimes, well, what I learned about my back is that sometimes to figure out why my back was hurting, I needed to ask, well, what was I doing 3 days ago? Because sometimes the effect didn't show up right away. And with dietary things, sometimes the effect doesn't show up right away. And you need to kind of go back 2 or 3 days and sort of look at what was I eating that now I feel like this. And the other thing that I would encourage in regards to that advice is pay attention to your energy within the first 2 to 3 hours after a meal. And if your energy drops, that was a bad meal. You know, your energy shouldn't drop after a meal. And if it does, you're not feeding your body the best way it could be fed.
And it's so interesting, Doc, because how many times you guys been to a meeting and there's a lunch break, and then the speaker or the presenter that has to follow the lunch break always says, great, I'm the guy following the lunch break, because they know everybody's energy is going to drop because of what they ate. Now they didn't connect the dot like he just did. But have you ever been to a meeting where they say it? The guy says, oh man, I'm following you at lunch, you're all going to be asleep. Yeah. Well, listen to your body. That's a great piece of advice right there. It's pretty cool. What else? Anybody?
Well, I just want to say that for me personally, in the line of work that I'm in, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, for me personally, in the line of work that I'm in, I provide benefits for companies. And along with that, a lot of the carriers that I represent have what we call wellness programs. But this conversation is not part of those wellness programs. And really what happens is, in my view, this is my second meeting with this Dr. Lang, and the conversation just needs to happen, and the conversation just needs to happen more often. And I think that with that being said, people are going to get the idea. It might not take them as long as it maybe took us in the room, but the idea is to really have the conversation and take the actions and see what the results can be. And if that's the message, then I'm excited about it. I see a lot of applications with this conversation within my own line of work, and how we can talk about getting on the front end of the chronic diseases versus being at the tail end of them. And we also, too, live in a society where it's a quick fix. You know, we want quick results. We want to have a quick fix. And when you go see your doctor, you respect them and you listen to them. And if they are going to prescribe something that is going to keep your symptoms at bay long enough for you to be okay with it, then that's probably going to be your easiest choice. But to really think about your gut health and your diet and your exercise and how that might affect you, that's not as easy as taking a pill. And that's really where we've become. That's really where our society has gotten with health insurance and with the benefits that we provide. It's almost a quick fix. We want the lowest deductible. We don't want to have much out of pocket. Well, if we had this conversation, then maybe we could have more of a catastrophic based plan and allow people to be more consumer driven and really take it upon themselves to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. And I already have ideas, and I've talked to Jim a little bit about some things that I want to do with larger groups that I represent on a health and wellness perspective that I think could really be impactful, because really the trend in health insurance is going towards more of a reportable, monthly reporting where the employer can see where the money of the health insurance is being spent. And then what we can do then as a benefit consultant, we can do the risk management behind it and say, hey, maybe we need to adjust your frequency for primary care visits and specialist visits, or maybe we need to adjust your frequency or change the plan dynamic so that it's not so easy to go to the ER by having like a low copay. Maybe we need to beef that up a little bit so people aren't really susceptible to do that. So the point is, the conversation that we got to have the conversation. We got to inform people, and I think this is a really great start. It's great information, and I think there's a lot of application. I see that for me personally, it's a good thing. If that makes any sense.
You know what, from your perspective, absolutely it does, and it does turn in. Okay, so I like to talk about making people happy. Okay, because that's what I think we're here to do. I boil it down, kindergartner level of understanding. Everyone wants to be happy, all right? We got to. Bottom line is going broke, being sick doesn't make you happy. And businesses, small businesses, medium-sized businesses in particular, are going broke, paying for insurance, and people aren't getting better. A lot of them are dropping it, and they're making their employees chip in, where that's never happened before in small and medium-sized businesses. All of these things are creating, hopefully, a hunger for what we just shared in the eyes of people. And it doesn't need to be this way. It does not need to be this way. And you don't need to give up your entire lifestyle. All I'm suggesting is make the critical changes. I believe that people make the changes and they feel the benefit of the simple changes, they'll continue to make more changes. Asking somebody to drop everything they do on a daily basis in terms of their current habits and change completely isn't going to happen. It's not going to happen. But what can happen are the things we laid out. Supplementing wisely, getting some good bacteria in your gut one way or another, doing a few key things, learning to avoid low glycemic. Do it in that order. Start with one, work on it for a month or two, go to the next one for a month or two, and it won't be hard. That's just my belief on that. So thanks, Bart. And Doc, we want to talk with Bart sometime because he has some ideas about trying to do presentations to large groups.
Yeah, I'd like to comment real briefly on. I think especially for what his plans are, but I think it's relevant to everybody that might want to share some of these concepts with other people, which, I think that when you have the truth or pretty close to the truth, we have a kind of an obligation to try to share it with people that are going down the wrong path. And at least that's how I feel about stuff. And one of the things that is unfortunate about what I've shared with you is that there are very well-funded organizations that will push back very strongly against the idea that, number one, high glycemic foods are bad, and number two, that these particular chemicals that I have not named are bad. And if you don't face that, once a person is sick, they don't get better. You can sort of nibble around the edges, and you can start the process, like Jim said, with a prudent and vigorous nutritional supplement program. But if you're poisoning yourself at the same time and you don't know how you're doing it, then you don't get better. People stay sick. And so at some point, it has to be a kind of an integrated, these concepts have to be integrated into the big picture. They don't all, I agree with Jim, they don't all have to happen at the same time. For some people, they do want to know the big picture so that they can do it all at the same time. Others, as Jim suggests, just want to do the easy thing. And the easy thing will work for a while, but it won't work long term if you don't address these other issues. But understand that there are people that are going to push back and say, that's not true, such as like the American Diabetes Association. They still have this ADA diet that is designed to keep people, or it's not designed to, I should say, but if you follow it, you will not be able to reverse diabetes with it. And if you were following a program that did reverse diabetes by lifestyle, and you then were stuck on the ADA diet, you would go back into diabetes. And there are people that very much believe that that's the right path. And as you try to instruct them on these alternatives, there's going to be some pushback amongst people that have a vested interest in the alternative. And there's a lot of them. But right. I just want to recognize, I think it's really great that Bart wants to do that, but there's going to be people that will say, wait a minute, no, my toe's being stepped on now. And I
think that's another, and I'm going to work on this because I want to help people not be afraid to share this information. And what I've seen in the past is somebody represents this company selling this product and somebody selling this product over here. And it's all of a sudden their religion. Okay. And you start talking about it. If you say, well, what about this? It's almost like you're offending their religion. Okay. It's their belief system now that you're screwing too deep here, kind of thing. And it's like, no, I want to honor everybody where they are. I want to give them the information and hopefully encourage them to consider something new. But I'm not going to club somebody over the head. I want to find the people that are interested in being responsible for their own health and work with them. And I have another. Have you ever heard me tell Zig Ziglar's apple a day? Did I ever tell you that?
No.
So my belief, and part of my belief again, is that one of the things I think is cool when people start taking our Cell Essentials, the fundamental product. You take them in the morning, you take them in the evening. Okay, so it's not an apple a day. You're going to be doing it in the morning and the evening. But Zig Ziglar said about healthy habits. He said, apple a day does keep the doctor away, and it has nothing to do with the apple. He said, a person that is willing to take one proactive action a day towards managing their health is more likely to take more than one. And so can we open the door for people with one healthy habit that is honestly going to benefit them and open the door to others? And that's why I like the idea of talking to people in a simple fashion. You don't just one step. That'll definitely benefit. So anyway, apple a day keeps the doctor away. All right. Go ahead.
About organic apple cider vinegar?
There's a apple cider.
How do you get away from yourself, Doc? So, anybody? Anything particular?
What are you drinking?
She wants to know what you're drinking.
What are you drinking?
Oh, it's dilute organic apple cider vinegar. That's why.
So explain, since she asked the question, explain the benefits of what is kefir and what are the benefits. Do you know what kefir is?
I've heard of it.
She's heard of it, but explain the benefit of making your own kefir, and then it's a 1-2 punch. You got the kefir, and then you got the apple cider vinegar. And that's, we do it every day.
Okay. So the organic apple cider vinegar it's an ancient drink, really. And most people think of vinegar as something that's really clear. The first time I saw organic apple cider vinegar, I sort of cringed about the idea of drinking it because it's got all this junky stuff floating in it, which that's actually where all the nutrients in the probiotic bacteria are. So when you see clear vinegar, most of the good stuff has been filtered out of it. So organic apple cider vinegar still has active cultures in it. And so when you drink it, you're taking some very powerful probiotic bacteria. So anything that's a fermenting food is a probiotic bacteria as far as the gut's concerned, because people have been fermenting their food for centuries, actually thousands of years. And so organic apple cider vinegar I like because it has a couple of species that are really unique. They're not found in any kind of a supplement. And one of those species actually consumes a pesticide called glyphosate. So if a person is making lifestyle choices to limit glyphosate in their body, then they have this food that will actually eat some of the glyphosate that might get through. If you're like eating organic, you're still going to get some glyphosate because of water contamination. So it's not only giving you good bacteria, but it's giving a bacteria that eats glyphosate or lives off of can live off of glyphosate, whereas glyphosate usually kills other bacteria. And it also has this acetic acid in it, which has a whole bunch of health benefits that I won't get into. And kefir is a fermented milk, which is very different from soured milk. So the bacteria that are responsible for fermenting milk are very different species than those that sour milk. And they are very powerful probiotic bacteria, and they're very complementary to the organic vinegar. And interestingly, the bacteria that are in kefir eat organophosphate pesticides. So again, if you're trying to limit your exposure to these chemicals, then your exposure is a lot less, and these probiotic foods can actually consume some of the pesticides and herbicides that are still getting through, and less damage done to the body then. So the third thing is sauerkraut, homemade sauerkraut, which is Jim didn't talk about because he doesn't like to make it.
I want to learn how. But see, I'm glad you asked that question. The reason is I was kind of going off on a little supplementation thing there. And the order I threw it out there for people like the apple a day, start with supplementing. But you kind of went almost to the next step with your question and said, what is that? That's the next step. Is it apple cider vinegar? It's cheap. You buy a big bottle of it. The brand name is Bragg.
I was just gonna ask if it was Bragg.
It's Bragg, and it's no big deal to buy that stuff. It'll last you a bit. I promise you won't drink it in a week.
You do want to dilute it.
And you must dilute it because of the pH. Otherwise, you cause some problems to yourself, your teeth, your esophagus, and other things, because it has a very high pH. But step 1 and 2 are that easy.
What's the proportion?
He recommends tablespoon to 4 to 6 ounces. Is that right?
Yeah.
I do
It can be
shot.
less. There's some people don't like that amount. A little is better than nothing. The way that I discovered this as a health thing was way before I understood the probiotic stuff. I'd been using it for treating people with heartburn for a long time, for years, kind of wondering why it worked. And then as I discovered this probiotic stuff, I realized, well, that's how it's working in part. And so it's interesting that something that is so acidic actually helps people with heartburn, but it really does.
Because they're getting a healthier gut biome, right?
In part. The acetic acid is doing something also, but it's kind of mysterious.
As compared to what I have some friends who will listen to me, and they're taking prescription medication for acid reflux and heartburn that are actually doing damage to the biome.
Yeah, well, that and the lining.
And so anyway, it's just a matter of simple steps. There's 2.
Okay, so last time I was here and tonight, you have said the word supplementation, but neither of you have talked about what you're proposing.
So I have kind of a tiered approach. I try to discern from patients whether they're interested in a very targeted at aiming at their most obvious and egregious deficiencies, which I can always be sure they're vitamin D deficient, and most of them are B12 deficient, or do they want to take a more broad approach? And if they want to take a more broad approach, then I tell them about the USANA Cell Essentials product. The reason I do that is because back in the early 1990s, I spent a lot of time investigating antioxidant supplements, and I landed on the USANA product as a recommendation because of it being a pharmaceutical grade formulation. That was very, very important to me because I knew then that the nutritional supplement industry was very poor quality control, and it is way, way worse now. The raw ingredients that make up many of the products come straight from China. A lot of the labels that say made in the USA, they're using raw ingredients that come straight from China without any testing. So that's even more important than it was then. But having something where the label is precise, it's got in it what it says it does, and more importantly, it doesn't have any toxins in it that are often present. That was really critical for me to be able to comfortably recommend any kind of a nutritional supplement to people. And then as time went by and I could see people's responses, some of them were like when my sister started to try it, she'd been sick for a year with a complication of pregnancy that is called preeclampsia. She'd almost died. And she'd been sick for a year, and within a month after starting the essentials, she was well. And that really got my attention. So I noticed over the years that people that did use this supplement, it didn't matter what the condition was, they tended to do a lot better than people with a similar condition who didn't use it. So I've seen sort of side-by-side comparisons of virtually every disease for now approaching 25 years. And so I do think that there is something to the idea that drove this product, which is that it's based on the research that is called human cell culture technology. Basically, what nutrients do you have to put in a petri dish to keep cells alive? And that was the basis for what's in this product. And then since then, they've tweaked it with this cell signaling stuff I told you about. As far as mitochondrial signaling, that's purposefully built into the product now. So I do consider it to be the best possible thing that somebody can do if they're interested in a broad spectrum solution to their nutritional supplement needs. And I do think it's always better than the targeted solutions, but some people, that's not what they're interested in.
Any questions about the product?
So, well, I don't know anything about the product, but regarding vitamin D and B12, what is the level that one should be?
The question is how much D and B12 you should be at?
Yeah.
Well, for most labs, the vitamin D level goes from, on whatever the scale is, from 30 to 100. So the amount of nutrient that takes to get to that level, surprisingly, is about 5,000 units for most people. And that's way more than the current federal guidelines, which are 1,000 units, which is way more than it used to be. But if you're taking only 1,000 units of vitamin D, I can guarantee you're deficient. Your levels will be lower than normal. I haven't seen one person who has normal levels that's taking that amount unless they've got a lot of sunlight exposure. And B12 is a lot more complicated because the norms in the United States are different from other countries. They haven't been updated since I was in medical school. And basically the bottom level of what's normal in the United States is where you start to get the most serious symptoms of vitamin B12 deficiency, which is nerve damage and a pretty severe anemia. In other countries like Japan, their normal is about halfway between our normal upper and lower levels. And that's where I start to see people starting to have fatigue as a side effect or as a symptom of not having enough B12. And how much B12 you need to take to correct that is really variable. And so there's not a really one answer for that one. Most companies try, and I know USANA has a sort of a modest approach to their B12. It's plenty of B12 for somebody whose GI tract is working, and it's not enough if they've got a GI tract issue where they're not absorbing it.
So how else would you get the B12? Or how would you know?
How would you know that you needed more?
Yes.
Unfortunately, the only way you know for sure is a blood test. But most people, in my experience, they experience more energy even as they go from normal to high normal. So you might benefit from super normal levels of B12. So by supplementing a good sublingual form of B12. If you felt a lot of energy 2 to 3 hours after that, and it was consistent, the chances are pretty good that you need that. But if you're trying to do it without any blood tests, otherwise, I mean, normally I would rely on a blood test to be able to tell somebody if they're low or not. But some people, way back before blood tests were available, doctors used B12 shots a lot because it helped people feel better. And so there were, once the blood tests became available and the norms are established, the ability to do that went away because you can't give shots to people that aren't technically low by US standards. Or the insurance won't pay for it is what it comes down to.
Okay.
Did I answer your question?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess getting the blood test would, well, so if I went to my regular physician and said, you know, I want you to test my blood for vitamin D and B12, I suspect they're going to say why, and it's not covered. Now, I do have a chiropractor friend who has someone that'll draw blood. It'll cost $150 and they'll do an analysis of a lot of things. But, you know, going back, so I'm sort of on the fence of, you know, who do I trust? My, you know, regular physician or my chiropractic friends and, you know, people that I do respect. But,
right.
You know, if I need to go to the hospital, they're not there to take care of me. So, you know, we don't have you here.
Well, there is, if you go online, there's quite a bit of stuff on the vitamin D issue because the idea that vitamin D actually helps prevent breast cancer and prostate cancer in men has been floated for more than 10 years now. And there's quite a bit of support for the concept. And you can actually arrange for your own vitamin D levels. There's I can't remember the name of the organization, but they will, you know, actually send you the kit to get your blood drawn. So you can get vitamin D levels without going through your physician. I would think that most doctors are quite open to checking vitamin D levels if the patient asks for it. I would be surprised if they said, no, you don't need it. As far as B12 level, that if you didn't have fatigue or some other symptom, he would be reluctant to order it because he wouldn't have a diagnostic reason for it. But vitamin D deficiency is low and is so common that asking it or ordering it because the patient requested, I think, is a lot of doctors would do that. I'm not sure your doctor would, but I wouldn't. I don't.
Can you have too much of D or B12?
Yeah, the D you can. That's that upper limit that goes up to 100. I've had maybe 1 out of 100 patients go above that level, taking 5,000 units a day. They just absorb it better. We're actually designed to make our vitamin D from sun exposure. We're not designed to take vitamin D as a supplement. But because we don't get sun exposure, we don't make our own vitamin D. The only way we can get it is with supplement because there's not foods that are rich in vitamin D. The foods that are rich in vitamin D would not be palatable to most people. B12, you cannot get too much. You could take a B12 shot every day. It would not be toxic. There's no toxic level known for B12. So you can't overdo B12. It's extremely safe. So for playing around with it in terms of trying different doses and how you feel, would be very safe to do that without actually knowing what your level was. With D, I definitely would not go above 5,000 units a day without getting a blood test.
Okay, thank you.
Are you
You're welcome.
Are you taking D?
Yeah, I got 1,500.
But I want to add one more thing though. The vitamin D epidemic created a new problem, which was as people started taking vitamin D, they became very good at their body became very good at absorbing calcium from the food. See, we were treating women with large doses of calcium because they were vitamin D deficient, and we didn't know it with the osteoporosis problems of the last 2 decades. When you take vitamin D at sufficient levels to fix the deficiency, you're going to absorb calcium very well from your food, and then you create a new problem because most people are deficient in vitamin K2, which is a critical supplement that tells the body where to put calcium because it activates proteins in the bone that help it to grab onto calcium, and it activates proteins in the arteries that tells the body don't put calcium here. And those proteins are all through the body that tells the body don't put calcium here. And if you don't have vitamin K2 in sufficient amounts, then you're actually going to be helping your body calcify soft tissue when you fix your vitamin D deficiency. So you want to address K2 at the same time, which technically you can do with whole foods, but if you're not eating the right foods, then a K2 supplement is probably a good idea, because you don't want to be calcifying soft tissue, which is inevitable if you have lots of extra calcium and you're K2 deficient, which 90% of the U.S. population appears to be.
Which is another reason to take a look at a broad spectrum product, because this is, I can't find another one with K2. I haven't found it yet, and I've asked people, if you find that product, I want to know about it. But so from what you're telling me, just that product alone, in addition to all the other stuff that you would be getting, you'd be getting more D than you're currently getting in a excellent form of D3, and you're going to be getting K2, which makes the issues that he's talking about. So that's one of the cool things about this particular product. I don't think anybody has taken the time or the expense to put together a more comprehensive product and focused on the balances and ratios in accordance with the cell signaling technology that he was alluding to. So that's why I think everyone on the planet should be taking that product. I feel strongly about it.
But I do want to be clear there. You can get K2 from the food. If you're eating the right foods, you can get it, but it's not. There aren't a lot of foods in the American diet that are rich in it. That's part of the problem in the U.S. And that's probably been the case since the 1960s, probably. And we didn't know K2 was different from K1 and how it worked until this century. And so it was assumed to be a variant of K1, but it actually is quite different, does very, very different things. And so, it's something that a lot of people haven't heard of yet. And so their awareness isn't there yet, but you'll see a lot more advertisements about K2 in the near future.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Right. I think you answered the questions, Doc. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Well, I think that your concept of you don't have to do it all at once, I just want to encourage that. I think the idea is trying to make gradual change, but always moving in the right direction. Not, what can I do a little bit different is a good question to ask. And one last, this is for Kim, and the question about the low glycemic eating, and is that good? Is that the best approach? And I have a relative who is pregnant for the 5th time, and she is, for the first time, followed the dietary strategy that is part of what I talked about today. And she said that she has felt the best during this pregnancy of any pregnancy she's had of the 5, just because of how she's eating differently. So it's a good example of how low glycemic eating affects but especially the health of the mom as she's dealing with pregnancy. So I do want to encourage you to all look at how can you eat low glycemic most of the time, and I promise you, you'll feel better. It's one of the things I can tell people. I promise you, you'll feel better if you do this.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Doc, before you go, Ken, I sent you a text. I know that you're going to be out of town, but is the fourth Tuesday of August? I'm sorry, the fourth Tuesday of August. Are you going to be able to do this again? I know you can't do this.
Yeah, I can. I can do that. I saw your note. I just didn't have a chance to get back to you.
No problem. I understand. I just wanted to find out when we were doing this again. And thank you for doing this. Really appreciate your time and all your information.
You're welcome. God bless you all. Have a good day.
Thank you.